What happened in New Orleans during Mardi Gras wasn't just another celebrity headline. It was a moment that quietly revealed how fast celebration can turn into consequence. Late at night, in one of the most crowded and energetic parts of the city, a familiar face was suddenly surrounded by emergency responders, police, and onlookers. Not on a movie set, not on a red carpet, but in real life, under flashing lights, with no script and no second takes. And what makes this moment different isn't just what reportedly happened. It's when, where, and why it fits into a much bigger pattern that many people missed. Because this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a longer story that's been unfolding quietly for years. Just after midnight, during the peak of Mardi Gras celebrations in New Orleans, an incident reportedly unfolded outside a bar in the French Quarter, one of the city's most crowded and closely watched areas. According to publicly available information and eyewitness accounts later shared with media outlets, Shia LaBeouf had been inside the venue earlier that night. At some point, bar staff allegedly escorted him outside. The specific reason has not been officially confirmed. What is known is that shortly after being removed from the bar, a physical confrontation reportedly occurred outside the establishment. Video obtained by media later showed the aftermath rather than the incident itself, an important distinction. In the footage, LaBeouf is seen outside the bar, shirtless, speaking animatedly with people nearby. There is no clear footage of the confrontation itself, only what followed. A chaotic street scene, typical of Mardi Gras night, but with an unusual level of attention focused on one person. This detail matters, because it sets the tone for how the story should be understood. What circulated publicly was not the event, it was the aftermath. And that difference shapes everything that came next. So, how did a crowded celebration turn into paramedics, police involvement, and an arrest, without a clear public record of what actually started it? According to eyewitness statements, after the reported altercation, LaBeouf initially walked away from the immediate area, but shortly afterward he returned to the front of the bar. That's when emergency medical personnel reportedly arrived. Video and photos later showed LaBeouf being evaluated by paramedics on the street. Importantly, there were no visible signs of serious injury. He appeared conscious, mobile, and responsive while speaking with emergency responders. At one point, he was placed inside a parked ambulance with its lights flashing, a scene that quickly drew attention from passers-by and photographers. Not long after, according to court records, LaBeouf was taken into custody. He was later charged with 2 counts of simple battery, a misdemeanor offense under Louisiana law. No additional charges related to weapons or severe harm were reported. At this stage, it's critical to use careful language. These are charges, not convictions. The legal process determines outcomes, not headlines. But the arrest itself immediately reignited public discussion for a reason that had very little to do with Mardi Gras. Because for many people watching this unfold, the questions weren't about the bar, they were about the pattern. This wasn't the first time Shia LaBeouf's personal life made headlines outside of his work. Over the years, he has spoken publicly about struggles with substance use, mental health, and unresolved trauma. In a widely reported 2017 incident in Savannah, Georgia, he was arrested for public intoxication and disorderly conduct, an event that later led to court-mandated treatment. Following that arrest, LaBeouf entered rehabilitation programs and has since spoken openly about attempting sobriety, therapy, and long-term recovery support. In multiple interviews over the years, he has linked periods of instability to untreated trauma and symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress, rooted in his childhood experiences in the entertainment industry. This context does not excuse alleged behavior, but it does explain why this Mardi Gras incident resonated beyond a single night. Because for many observers, it didn't feel random. It felt like another chapter in an ongoing struggle that's been playing out publicly and privately for a long time. But here's the detail most headlines skipped. Just hours before the arrest, the atmosphere looked completely different. Earlier that same day and evening, LaBeouf had been seen in the French Quarter participating in post-Mardi Gras celebrations. Photos and video captured him dancing, moving through the crowd and appearing relaxed among other revelers. No visible conflict, no police presence, just another face in the crowd during one of the city's biggest nights of the year. This contrast is important because it highlights how quickly public situations can shift, especially in environments built around celebration, alcohol, noise, and constant stimulation. In places like the French Quarter during Mardi Gras, the margin between enjoyment and escalation can be extremely thin, even for people without a history of public scrutiny. And once that line is crossed, the consequences are immediate and permanent. So what happens next, legally, personally, and professionally, after a moment like this? And why does this incident raise a much larger question about fame, recovery, and public expectations? Once the arrest was confirmed, attention quickly shifted from speculation to process. Because in situations like this, the legal details matter more than the noise around them. According to court records, the charges filed were 2 counts of simple battery. Under Louisiana law, this classification typically refers to non-aggravated physical contact and does not automatically imply serious injury or intent to cause severe harm. It's a legal distinction that often gets lost online. At this stage, there were no reports of additional charges, no mention of weapons, and no indication of long-term injury related to the incident. As with all cases, the presumption of innocence applies unless and until a court determines otherwise. What follows next is usually procedural. Court dates, legal representation, and possible resolutions that range from dismissal to negotiated outcomes. But legally speaking, this part of the story is often the quietest. The loudest impact usually happens somewhere else entirely. Because while court records move slowly, public perception doesn't. For someone whose career began in childhood, public identity can become something you manage rather than something you choose. Over the years, LaBeouf has been unusually open about the challenges of trying to recover while living under constant visibility. Therapy, structured recovery programs, and attempts at long-term stability have all been discussed publicly by him in past interviews. Recovery, however, is rarely linear. Setbacks don't erase progress, but they do complicate the narrative, especially when they happen in public spaces during high-profile events. This is where stories like this often become distorted. Instead of being seen as moments within a long process, they get framed as definitive statements, proof of failure or success, when in reality, they are neither. They are moments, and moments don't tell the whole story. So why does this keep happening with public figures? And why do we expect their personal growth to look perfect? Mardi Gras isn't just a celebration, it's a high-intensity environment. Crowds, noise, alcohol, constant movement, limited personal space. All of these factors increase emotional volatility, even for people with no history of public incidents. 4. Individuals navigating sobriety or mental health challenges. Environments like this can amplify risk rather than provide escape. That doesn't place responsibility on the environment, but it explains why certain moments become pressure points. And once something goes wrong in a space filled with cameras, phones, and bystanders, there's no private reset button. Everything becomes content. But here's the deeper question most coverage avoids. What happens after the headlines fade? Historically, incidents like this don't end careers overnight, but they do reshape them. Casting decisions, insurance considerations, and production schedules often react not to single events, but to patterns. Studios prioritize predictability, especially on long-term projects. At the same time, audiences have changed. There is now more space for nuance, accountability, and growth. But that space only exists when public figures actively engage with it. Silence can protect privacy, but it can also allow assumptions to fill the gap. How this moment fits into LaBeouf's professional future depends less on one night and more on what follows, privately and publicly. And that's something we haven't seen yet. Because the real story here may not be about an arrest, but about how society understands recovery when it happens in real time. Incidents like this tend to disappear from headlines quickly, but the underlying questions stay much longer. What responsibility does the public have when watching someone navigate recovery in real time? Where is the line between accountability and spectacle? And why do moments like this feel so familiar, even when the details change? Part of the answer lies in how fame works today. Public figures don't experience setbacks privately. Every pause, every misstep, every attempt to regain balance happens under observation. Growth becomes something people debate instead of something people live. That pressure doesn't create problems, but it can magnify them. And when those moments happen during events built on excess and intensity, the contrast becomes even sharper. But here's what often gets overlooked. Most stories don't resolve in a courtroom or a headline. They resolve quietly, over time. It's possible to hold two truths at the same time. Accountability matters. So does context. Understanding the factors surrounding an incident does not excuse alleged behavior, but it does prevent oversimplification. And oversimplification is where real learning stops. When stories are reduced to a single night, they lose the years that led up to it, and the years that follow. What happens next for Shia LaBeouf won't be defined by one Mardi Gras night alone. It will be shaped by choices made after the cameras leave, the crowds disperse, and the noise fades. Those are the moments the public rarely sees, but they're the ones that matter most. This wasn't just a story about an arrest. It was a reminder of how fragile progress can be, how powerful environments are, and how quickly public narratives form, often before the full picture is visible. And it raises a deeper question worth exploring next. How does long-term recovery work when your life has been public since childhood, and mistakes don't stay private? That's where this story continues. If you want to understand how fame, accountability, and personal growth intersect, not in theory, but in real life, the next video breaks that down in detail.